Hi, and welcome to Decoding AQ, helping you to learn the tools, mindsets, and actions to thrive in an ever-changing world.
Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Decoding AQ. With me today, I have Navid Nazemian. He's joining us very recently moving out to Dubai, and he helps executives de-risk and accelerate their career transition. So before I give a full bio, welcome, Navid.
Thank you very much, Ross. Very much looking forward to the conversation today.
Great. So as he's an author of the international bestseller, Mastering Executive Transitions, I joked that before we hit the record, we're probably going to be playing the word bingo of transitions, I have a feeling. But you're a global speaker, one of HR's most influential practitioners in 2020. You spent time as a university lecturer and held multiple senior HR roles in FTSE 500 companies like Adidas, GE, BAT, and most recently as group head of HR at Vodafone. So having spent 26 years in a variety of blue chip multinational companies, Navid considers himself to be incredibly lucky, and he's now embarked on perhaps one of the biggest executive transitions of his own life, maybe, as he begins this new journey to dedicate himself full-time to coaching and this body of exciting work that is in mastering executive transition. So my first question for you, Navid, is what motivated you to make that transition from Vodafone to now?
Yes, Ross. I think it all evolved. If you had asked me 5 years ago, where would you like to be in 5 years' time? The answer would have been something along like a CHRO or, heading up HR for a large, medium-sized kind of publicly listed company. But this is what happens. I mean, we all have ideas and we have plans, and then there is a practical reality and there's an evolvement of the environment around us. I mean, if you looked at company risk registers, this is an exercise I've been involved in many, many times. A pandemic usually not feature, and if it did, it really wouldn't be featured as a significant event that could actually that would have a high probability of happening, and if so, then what would be the consequence to the business model? And as we all know, it did happen, and boy, how hard it hits the global economy. So this is it's true that I didn't plan on this exactly 5 years ago. But somewhere in my coaching practice that I have been privileged to have next to my full-time role, I've always had the privilege and the honor to work with very, very senior leaders outside of my own organization. And so it always felt natural for me to connect with senior leaders, and they seem to be getting a lot of value, and they always referred me to other clients. As a matter of fact, I still don't have an actual website. There's a book landing page because my publisher was insisting on having one. But other than that, it's all word of mouth and recommendations and referrals from current or previous clients of mine.
And for many people, these transitions come because of various different things. It can be an outside factor, an event. It can be, as for you, an evolution from, as some might describe, hey, a bit of a side hustle, something that you're doing to expand your own learning, your own contribution to the world, becoming then the main gig as we evolve through portfolio careers or multiple things that we add in that we can learn, we can earn from, and we can serve, that we contribute in life. So I'm interested actually about a little bit more in the book. And as I understand, it took a bit of time to write. These things do evolve. I'm on my fourth book at the moment, and the challenge is that they're never done. They're just abandoned. At some point you have to say enough is enough. So tell me a little bit, what the journey was like in creating that book, the length of not just the time, but some of the key triggers maybe in the transitions from the idea to the point of it's out in the world.
Yes. I mean, first off, Ross, congratulations for being a multiple published author. One of the first things I learned when I started to work with a guy called Professor Eric Costa, who teaches an online course of how to become a published author. and he teaches at Georgetown University. It's a global curriculum that he teaches. He said in session 1 that the probability of actually seeing a project like a book through lies somewhere around 2 to 3%. So if you wanted to look at it the other way, the chances of failure, or the likelihood of not really seeing this through as a complete project, is about 97 to 98%. Now, that is higher than any other profession you could imagine. I mean, you go after, jet fighter pilots or nuclear scientists, you can go really niche and expert, and their chance of succeeding is much higher than that of authors. So this was an interesting way of opening the class, I guess. But coming back to my own journey, again, this was a 7-year project. I never thought of it to be that long. I always thought of a book to be a year-long project. After all, I was writing about a topic that I felt quite knowledgeable about. I had an emotional connection to the topic. It wasn't a paper for the university because I need to pass this exam. It was really something I felt really excited about. But the reality is, Ross, life just gets in the way. And so in between those 7 years, I had 3 jobs in 3 countries, in 2 organizations. And of course, I had to deliver major transformation. I did in Vodafone, Germany, when I was hired to come in, I did the post-merger integration with Tower Deutschland Group for the commercial division. And so there was always, life was pretty much full on. And therefore, carving out time to really dedicate that to the topic of the book, and really, being able to put something out there that I feel proud of, felt very hard. So it was a struggle, and it took me about 6 years to produce something like 60 pages. And by then, I really felt, okay, I probably won't have enough time in my rest of life to finish that as a book. How about I go and publish this as a white paper? I think it was good enough for that reason. And then, of course, I met Eric Costa and started to learn how to really write an actual book. And yeah, within a matter of 6 months, I produced another 180 pages, and then it became an actual book. So, as always, I'm a coach. I work with other leaders who want to do something that I am very competent in supporting them doing. And so it was a really a lucky coincidence, I would say, that I bumped into him, and then it all kind of, went from there.
It's interesting, isn't it, that, it's often described that everyone's got a book inside them, but does it actually come and live? Does it manifest across the finishing line? And there is, frameworks, there's techniques, whether it's, 3-act piece, what are the various nuances of how you construct different types of, non-fiction books, that what's the thread, what's the theme, what are you trying to do of create the challenge, the how-to, the, transformation that comes through from the different knowledge. But what I've found is it is an incredible way of learning. Just the simple act of putting something out there, you learn so much in doing it. You think you've got some knowledge about something, and then you really try and underpin it and start to learn. I find it a very enjoyable process to hone, to think. And like you, I enjoy coaching other people, in areas. And a lot of that is then learning. As a coach, you're getting as much learning as you are in terms of serving. And one of the areas and aspects that you, this focus of executive transitions, first off, can you just frame what you mean by executive transitions, and where they're likely to be really coming up, and what is, some of the challenges they're facing, maybe what's top of mind for them. And so just give us a flavor for this executive transition world, if we're maybe not familiar with it.
Sure. So first off, there's a very popular book out there. It's called The First 90 Days, written by a guy called Michael Watkins. And that book is the absolute #1 best-selling book in the category that my book is also listed in. So that's the onboarding category, and it's on Amazon and it's anywhere else you can buy books. And so there, the author suggests that, onboarding is a 90-day job, which I actually agree with. Just when it comes to the executive level leadership, it never is a 90-day job, I find. So, and this is, of course, I embody the type of executives that I work with as a coach, because I have myself been a corporate animal, a corporate beast for the last 26 years or so. And so the idea about transition, the way I look at it, is more like a 12 to 18 months journey. And as a matter of fact, the framework that I introduced in my book, the Double Diamond Framework of Executive Transitions, has got 7 different phases to it. And only one of the 7 phases is the first 90 days. So there you can see how the topics really differ from one another. So whilst I consider the first 90 days to be a great book for a first-time manager, or maybe a middle manager or a junior person who wants to do a great job in onboarding themselves, inducting themselves into the job, when you get to the C-suite, unfortunately, nothing works with the 90-day suggestion. And so therefore, it's a 12 to 18 months journey. And that's my definition of a transition. And it nicely also aligns with the performance cycle in most organizations. If you're the incoming CEO, and I work with 4 of them right now as we speak, they get maybe a grace period of 90 to 120 days to announce the new strategy and what the plan could look like. But actually really seeing any fruition of that plan is unlikely to happen before the first 12 months or so. And therefore, this is how it differs from kind of something that's very popular in people's beliefs. Even in HR organizations and HR departments, the first 90 days is still considered to be the best onboarding book. And again, I give him that. It just so that at the senior leadership level, it just works differently.
So it's contextual, like many things in the world, that, we have this tendency to maybe be a lot more short-termism in our thinking and our planning, a lot of political, what's your 100 days, what's your 100-day plan, what's your 90 days? And that way of thinking to try and get value and return on that value of a new hire, a new investment, that potentially is elongated with hierarchy, with complexity. But also I'm interested in the impact of, is it actually a perpetual motion of onboarding? And what I mean by that is, you referenced Double Diamond. I'm very familiar with Double Diamond in innovation, in design thinking of, diverge and converge that we go through at multiple phases. And if you've gone through something that you're now feeling, hey, I've got this. When something changes, market, pandemic, technology, all of these things, maybe even viewing onboarding as a continual aspect, that there's a shift, might rewire our thinking for continual development, learning, and progress through what used to be a very linear structure for growth. So I'm just interested in your thinking around your Double Diamond framework, and maybe a perpetual view of that new eyes, that energy we put into onboarding, thinking, could we leverage that as a continuum?
Yes, absolutely, Ross. And you're spot on with this. I mean, first off, the reason I went for 7 phases and not 7 steps is exactly that. Because, it's quite likely that some of those phases will even overlap. Or what's been my experience is sometimes senior leaders come to work with me when they have already started to work and things don't go according to plan. And so, they're about to derail. And so they then come and say, oh, I need support. I think I need support here. And so, some of the phases that are often missed by senior executives are, what I describe to be the discover phase in my 7-phase framework. And the discover phase is -90 to day 0, which again is rarely spoken about. This is the pre-boarding phase. This is the pre-onboarding phase of the executive. And nobody needs to wait until day 1 to then start to think and engage with stakeholders as to what the plan could look like. but there are actually quite valuable things one could do already in the runner-up of starting a new position. That's just one example of how oftentimes when leaders reach out to me, they're already in the first 3 months or so, and that's why they want to work with me, because they think that I can help them with the first 90 days. But actually, in an ideal world, we would start working together as soon as they know what role they're going to go into. And that's also going to be something that we obviously consider. So it's absolutely true that this is not a step-by-step type model. And yet, again, every framework has to suggest an ideal state. And the ideal state would be that the client contracts with me or someone of my expertise, a few months before they actually start to go into that position. And then we work together for the next 12 months or so to come to help them with that transition. And the other aspect I want to mention is what I loved about the first 90 days when I got hold of that book back in 2008. So it was 5 years old by then. By now, it's almost 20 years old. And it's still going strong with very little changes since it was introduced. I really love the formulaic nature of it. Step 1, do this, step 2, do that, step 3, do this. The reality is, though, as I said, at the executive level, life just doesn't work like that. And so therefore, you need to have the flexibility to be able to attune and adjust as you go along. And there will be surprises on the way. I mean, one of the very popular things I did with my book is anyone who buys the paperback or the hardcover version of the book, which is going to be published very soon, the hardcover version, they will get the actual workbook. So that means, I did have to create my own scrappy Excel spreadsheet to put the first 90 days into practice. But anyone who buys the actual book, not the ebook, but the physical book, will get the 30-page PDF document that is the workbook to that. So again, even if they choose not to work with me or a coach, they could still apply the logic of the 7-phase model, the double diamond framework, into their own role and into their own context. So there are reflective questions that they can answer for themselves and so on. So this is, as I said, you're spot on that, I just never can believe that, 5 steps to overcome 9/11, grief. I don't think that the human nature is that simple, and things are usually more complex and more tricky.
Well, we've got a couple of things at play, haven't we, Navid? We've got these complex things called humans. Then we put them together with each other. Then they're in an organization that operates in an industry, that operates in an environment. And suddenly we're not on just a snakes and ladders game board of moving, but maybe we're in this, I have a vision from the Big Bang Theory where they're playing 3D chess. We're playing snakes and ladders in a 3D multiple layer. The complexity that shifts, that how do we adapt, that whilst we might have frameworks and principles, we always have to reflect, ask questions, and and the shift between concepts and theories and then the practicality of applying it to your situation is where the magic is. So I love this idea of books having practical workbooks with them as that support that allows someone to reflect and contextualize it for them. And I've got a couple of thoughts and questions here, because this transition of employee life cycle, and we go through multiple transitions, whether that is, hey, we're at a new company, or we are got, now much better at starting to get better at employee mobility. So how we might shift across departments, across divisions, across companies to retain some knowledge, but redeploy in new areas can often then unsettle people as they find a new environment or new team. And add to that, remote and hybrid. So one of the big challenges, and a lot of people that I'm talking to at the moment, is the playbooks they used to have, the step 1, do this, step 2, do this. Some of them apply, some of them don't. And there's different responses. So I've got 2 questions for you that are linked. First question is, how are we dealing and what are we doing best that you've seen to deal with hybrid transitions and hybrid onboarding? And the second part, kind of linked to it, is companies, for example, like Accenture, that have now launched their nth floor, which is their VR experience, where they are now onboarding and you spend all of your initial onboarding in the metaverse, in VR. And so I've got those two questions: that how do we deal with it in remote and hybrid? And maybe if you've got opinions on views on these big moves by these big players of leveraging VR for onboarding.
Yes. So maybe starting with your second question, because I think that's quickly dealt with. So first off, the digital world is here to stay, and so we better start engaging with it. And again, when I speak at large conferences, and I did allude to it just very briefly in my book, I use two companies examples of how they have embraced the digital world. And so Accenture is actually one of them, and the other one is PricewaterhouseCoopers, or PwC. So they have really gone all in making sure, because first off, they have a geographical footprint that requires that. They got a X thousand number of employees who are remote only, right? So they are welcome to join any of the offices that are in the kind of neighborhood, but they don't have to. And so how do you onboard someone that you don't physically meet? And probably Teams is not, Zoom is not the only way to do that. So they have embarked on this journey, and they also use, augmented reality, VR headsets and the like. And so I think, of course, by the time the metaverse is generally accepted, or the version of the metaverse that then becomes, more for the masses, that's where the action is going to happen now. That's kind of just about what's out there, and what would be really the next frontier in this on this topic. But coming back to the what can we do about this in the virtual world? To give you one example, when I was with Vodafone in my global head of HR role, supporting finance leaders globally, we had 5 finance directors who started in the middle of the pandemic in their position, hired externally, and 3 of them never met a Vodafone person face to face, so they were just hired virtually. And mind you, the finance director is usually the number 2, person in any of our markets. So it's the CEO, and usually then the CFO is the most important person. So you have a very practical business case for, you need to be doing something here, and you can't be just sending them the link and say, here's your, internet access, good luck. And so, there are actually articles on this topic, and then I'm going to cite one of them, which is from Harvard Business Review. And, it was written back in May 2020, which was a very timely article back then. So there, the authors are suggesting 6 unique steps that organizations should bear in mind when they virtually onboard their leaders. So the first one is around learning. And so the idea about learning as the first one is that organizations should provide a structured learning process. So if the learning process wasn't really structured before the pandemic face-to-face, it really now needs to be a much more structured and thought through way of engaging with the new leader. The second item is around goals. So again, I remember when we announced in Vodafone at some point that we're going to revert from the annual goals exercise to a quarterly rhythm. There was a lot of noise in the organization to say, is that really a good thing to do? Are we now going into the short term, next quarterly results type mindset? Is that really a good thing? But the reality is, as we were in the middle of a pandemic, nobody really knew what's going to happen beyond the 3 months timeline. Let alone, sometimes maybe not even what's going to happen next month in terms of revenue or customer churn. And so therefore, I think the idea about goals is that the leader needs to be very clear, crystal clear around goals and short-term objectives. The way they do that in the sales function, there's a 3-year long-range plan, and there's the annual, sales targets, and then that gets broken down into almost like daily sales numbers for the sales function. And so that's the idea. The third item is around stakeholders, and you will not believe it, Ross. I work with the most senior leaders in some of the world's most admired companies, and still some of these leaders don't have any idea or appreciation about their stakeholder universe. And of course, the organization could do so many different things to help them with it, such as having individuals who map the stakeholder universe based on the role, not necessarily the incumbent. And so again, it becomes even more important to build an even more robust stakeholder engagement plan for the C-suite leader. The fourth item is around buddy. And I think the great example I share in my book are technology companies, the likes of IBM, Microsoft, Amazon, and so on. The buddy is not there to replace the line manager nor the HR person, but really the virtual onboarding buddy is there to help with questions around culture and leadership, help with questions that are unsolved or not really understood, and that may be a little too sensitive to raise with your line manager or with your HR partner even. The fifth item is around team building, and this is a real example of, I have senior leaders coming to me and saying, even 6 months ago, I would love to do a real proper retreat with my leadership team. And I'm just waiting for all these, pandemic-related restrictions to fall so that we can have another proper retreat. And my advice to them always is, please do not do that. Do not wait until whatever the environment allows you to do that. How about doing a 3 or 4 hour session now to establish trust for you as a new leader, to get to know your team better and allow them to do the same with you. And then once, let's say 3 or 6 months down the line, once you're able to have your proper offsite retreat, 2.5 days in a beautiful location, maybe facilitated by a coach or a moderator, you can go deeper. So waiting to have everything perfect is usually not a good idea. And last but not least, the article suggests that the senior leaders should seek the counsel and advice and coaching from a transition coach, which again, I could not be happy about it, because it really is true, and evidence demonstrates that working with a transition coach can reduce the derailment risk by more than half. It can help to increase to kind of reduce the time to productivity of the new leader by another 50% or more, and so many more, value added items here. So this would be just a very short outline of how the topic transforms when we get into the virtual space.
And it's interesting because it covers a variety of things that are practical and human at the same time. That some of the practical things of who are the stakeholders, or where do I go to find XYZ, to a buddy that I can hang out with. And this balance, when we go through change, we're in a vulnerable state. We're in a state where we are potentially got these levels of uncertainty, these levels of fear, these levels of unknown. And when we're in that, we want to try and orientate ourselves. We want to try and find answers and all of the different things. I mean, what we focus on of adaptability, looking at resilience, unlearning, there's many things that people have to unlearn, the way they used to do things to now the way that they are embracing things in the new environment, in the new team. And what kind of support is there? What kind of levels of stress exist? Because not only are you in your isolation going through a transition, everyone around you is then transitioning to your new element. So it's that ripple effect that the support, I think, of onboarding is not only for the individual, but the people around them that might often get left behind. And I think this is one of the challenges I've seen, is where, as you said, getting it wrong is hugely expensive. An exec level, 2 times, 30 times their salary, if you get this wrong, of impact of the ripple effect. What if that person, not only within there, all the others around them, not functioning, not operating? We had one of our coaches, I'll share with you, Navid, work with one of the largest banks in America. And in a very short period of time, 9 senior leaders left. And so it was very derailing for, many, many people. And what was interesting is they all had similar structures around their profile of adaptability. What was being indicated as potential burnout risks or inability to shift to changes that were being required. And these transitions are periods of change. We have to evolve our thinking. We have to adapt to that new information. And so whilst I love this idea of executives, of leaders, and they set the tone, and getting that right, because it's the most critical, it's the most high expense, high risk, high return. But there's also many transitions going across an organization at any given point, isn't there? So we can learn from what we're doing. Is there any ways, or have you come across some of these things that around executive transitions that can apply in multiple areas across the business? And if so, what are they? And, you know, is that a good thing or a bad thing to try and model what happens at the top in lower levels?
Yes, I think the general trend, Ross, is, and Vodafone isn't any different here, that most organizations have done a really good job to get the basic onboarding process right. And so when I say basic onboarding process, it means that you are, let's assume you're an external hire. You show up on day one, and everyone is actually aware that you're coming. Everyone has been waiting for you to come, and on day one you will be provided with a working laptop, access to the systems. You will have some sort of a legal compliance training and get a general onboarding of the organization. So, in Vodafone, that used to be a half a day or sometimes a full day session, depending on the geography. So that's, I think, what most organizations get right. Where I think the real value lies is to try to move the needle into what I call higher value activities. And of course, that requires more resources, and there's always the cost involved as well. So I think each organization needs to sit down and reflect as to how deep they want to go. But, what I generally recommend for, kind of senior leadership and above is to focus on 3 more items as a minimum. So the first one is aligning expectations with line manager and the direct reports. And again, I've just onboarded. I was in the US 2 weeks ago, coaching a new CEO designate client of mine, someone who is now appointed on the 1st of September to take over the top job. And I usually conduct 360 interviews on their behalf with the line manager, their peers, and a subset of their direct reports. And it's sometimes surprising to see how how much there is or there isn't alignment around what is the expectations of this new incumbent, and to what degree is there alignment around what the expectations are. So I think that's one of the 3 items I would recommend. The second item I would recommend is to organize meaningful meetings with stakeholders, not just random business trips and going. And of course, it's always good to meet clients and employees, but really meaningful meetings that speak to the stakeholder universe that's been mapped for the position. And so again, that's I think that's a good thing to do. That's something the organization, the HR function can support with. And last but not least is to facilitate cultural familiarization. In my book, I speak about that. This is one of the chapters in the book, the top 10 reasons for failure. So what gets in the way? I mean, if we are involved in any executive hiring process, it's quite laborious. It's quite detailed. There's a lot of thinking and energy and money and investment that goes into this process. And despite that, 4 out of 10 executives don't make it. So there's always been this mystery around, like, what happens with that 40%? And one of the things that I give away as a summary of that chapter is, if I took the first top 10 reasons and aggregate them into 3 themes, the 3 themes for executive transition failure are people, politics, and culture. And so I can't overemphasize the aspect of culture. And in my book, I speak about the executive earning the right to change the culture. We have very prominent figures that have been brought in with the mandate to change the culture. But the reality is there's only so much you can change, in your first week or 2. And so, you need to really sit down and work with your coach and with the rest of your executive leadership team to really find what would be a good amount of change, injected into the organization. And by when do you feel you have earned enough merits or rights to come around and start questioning things, to suggest other ways of doing things? And so these are just 3 additional items that I find that could be scaled in organizations, no matter what really level of leadership you're speaking about.
had a couple of visuals hit me in my head there, Navid, when you were describing a few bits. One, this element of culture and change and earning the right. I've had a lot of conversations where people have often talked about, oh, got to look for cultural fit, hire for attitude, cultural fit, all of these things. The reality is it's always going to be cultural add. When you bring somebody in, it's always going to shift. It's going to shift that piece. And the bigger the rock that comes into there, the bigger the ripples of it. And I like that idea of earning the right to make shift and make change. And the cartoon image that came into my head about change was the one where who thinks something needs to change, and everybody's, yes, something needs to change. And so who's prepared and wants to change themselves, and like tumbleweed. And so that reality of we often see things need to change, but don't reflect that on our own ways and behaviors and views and actions. And we all also have a relationship with the way things have been. It's Marshall Goldsmith's book, what got us here won't get us there. And that whole concept when we're going through transitions is the deliberate act of deciding what to let go of and what to take with us, any of these phases. So I think the other thing that I wanted to just touch on before we move to a slightly different area was in executive transitions, one of the challenges many organizations are facing is diversity. And a mandate, might exist in a number of organizations to improve the diversity at senior level, at leadership level. And there's a whole Pandora's box of challenge within all of that. But from the basis of an executive transition, is there a bias in it? Does it need to be different for different diversities, different backgrounds, different cultures to be considered as part of a successful transition? Or should it be, no, this is the same, so we need to treat everyone equally? Or should we actually be being positively biased to ensure greater success if it is bringing in something that is very different? So I'm just really curious on your views in relation to the gender biases, or broader than just gender biases in executive transitions, good or bad?
Sure. I mean, first off, the 40% rate, the failure rate, is pretty much universally applicable. So it doesn't matter whether it's a male exec or a female exec. That's the good news, right? So it's not like one gender has figured it out and the other one is kind of, lagging behind them. One of the reasons why I actually delayed the launch of my book, it was not the reason it took me 7 years, by the way, but this study, I believe, came out in August 21. And I believe, we were meant to hit the printing press button in July or something like that. So I delayed the launch of my book as a result of this study. It was published by DDI, and what they did is what every good study should do. It's the so-called global transition study, the executive transition study, I believe what the study is called. And they do that every year or every other year. And what they do is, Ross, they always ask the demographic questions at the beginning of the survey, which every good study should do. And what they found out is, although the nature of the study wasn't really to find out anything about any particular gender, what they found out is that there is a 13 to 22 percentage point gap between what the male and the female executive leaders get in terms of support in their organization. Now, mind you, these are same level type leaders, right? So let's say the C-suite or the C-suite -1. And so that was a bit of a mystery to me as to how this can be, because, let's face it, the solution to this challenge is really simple. The organization decides what the executive transition support looks like. So what are the elements of support? And that will be baked into the transition process for that level of leadership, irrespective of the gender. So whilst this study didn't reveal any reasons for why that is, I found it fascinating that inside the same organization, there's a 13 to 22 percentage delta around things like what is the percentage of the executive leaders that received a leadership skills training as part of the transition and onboarding support? What is the percentage of the executive leaders that were formally assessed and were debriefed, so to give meaningful developmental input into the onboarding and development in general. And last but not least, what percentage of these executive leaders were assigned a formal mentor or coach? And again, the fascinating part about the last item is that, Ross, for some strange reason, even the companies and organizations that do support their executives with a transition coach don't always do that with internal promotions, because they just assume that the leader is kind of baked inside the same oven, and so they should know what's the best way forward. And the reality is they absolutely have a head start when it comes to culture and leadership, and yet everyone could benefit from this resource that's out there. And so again, they are involuntarily kind of biased against their support, because they just assume that because they're internal promotions, they're all good to go ahead. So these were just some aspects.
When we read studies and we see data, of course, we see it through our own lenses, our own eyes, and we hear what our brain's looking for. And we can look at a study like that and say, wow, if the failure rate is the same, but we're supporting differently, then either men need more support, women need less, or women are more successful with less support. All of these things that we can take these insights from, but we might not know the undercurrent of the causality of it. We can look at the correlations. So I find these things fascinating to consider. What are the right questions to ask? And when we're asking these right questions, ultimately it's to drive better decision making, so that we can be more preemptive for things. We can actually bring more smiles, bring more joy to work. A transition is a stressful time, a stressful situation, and it's the failure or success. I'm sure there's many hidden successes of actually inside it's not really working, but on the face of it, it is. And I think there's a lot of that going on in all sorts of roles at the moment that is just being pulled back, of this reality between the masks that we put on in front of ourselves of, is it really working? Are we smiling on the inside and on the outside, and the challenges of that? So coaching plays a huge role in being able to strip away those masks to help people deal with the realities of what's going on. So I'm a huge advocate of that. I want to flip the switch slightly to something where you mentioned how long before people then are really likely to have impact, expected to make decisions, 90 days, 100 days, they earn the right, to the difference of what's just happened here in the UK, where we've just got a new leader, new prime minister, and within the first day or two, having to make really big decisions about the energy price crises, all of these sorts of pieces. Now, I'm just fascinated on your view and opinion on when someone is in a role, in a transition where they don't have a luxury, call it luxury, maybe poor word, but a period of time to maybe earn the right to get onboarded, when there's a fire. There is something needed right now, need decisions, need stuff, need actions that are really crisis points in the early stages. How do people best deal with that? Because I think that is a very likely situation for many people going into new roles, is that there will be fires. So how can they best deal with fires in those early days? I'd be just really interested on your views on that, Navid.
Yes, sure. I mean, first off, I would like to remind everyone about the discover phase, which is the -90 to day 0. This is where you can start to engage with the role. In this case, I'm sure that none of the candidates really knew if they're going to make it, but boy, what a great idea to start preparing for it as if it was about to happen. So, once
they had a 50-50, right?
Yes,
yeah.
You at least have a plan that you have already worked on with your coach for the last 90 days or so. And so that's already giving you a head start. And I think there's something about the current state of the nation, whether it's the UK, Germany, or anywhere else in the world, Ross, that, there used to be this saying that every president has a 100-day grace period. I think that pretty much went ahead. many decades ago, if not, it never really existed. But I think the reality is that there's all this build-up in the runner-up of any one of these appointments. I mean, I've seen some of these politics playing out in organizations when there are two runner-ups. And, I may be working with one of them and the other one may be working with a different coach just to maintain the confidentiality of these appointments. And it's clear that only one of them is going to make it. And so that is not a nice situation to be in. And yet I think it's part of what, the world is asking for. And as you said, I mean, I remember Angela Merkel, I mean, that lady had 16 years of, challenges coming her way, some of which nobody could foresee. And of course, her successor now in post for what, I don't know, a year or two, has faced almost the same number of challenges in that, short time that he's been in office. And so it's just the way the world is working right now. And I think what we can do is to have frameworks that allow us to map out the future and yet allow a high degree of flexibility and ability to respond to what is next. And so whilst the energy crisis, seem to be like the number one issue right now in the UK, I don't know if that's true or not, but let's say in the perception of the public opinion, that may be one of the top three items. 2 years or a year down the line, it may be a crisis in the labor market or something else. And so again, it all comes back to, how is the leader able to map their role and work with a reflection partner, such as a coach, to best respond. I give you one example. So I use another framework in my coaching, which is, again, taken from DDI. I always love to give credit to other people's work so that, it doesn't appear like I figured everything out on my own. So this framework, it works with kind of half circles and is a generic study, and it looks at how do leaders need to change their skills and activities when they move up kind of, level by level. And it looks at the entire leadership as to three categories. So the first one is first level leadership. The middle one is kind of middle to senior leader. And the third one is the C-suite. And so if I take my own example, my last job with Vodafone, I consider myself to be in the middle layer. And so there are two items that I spend most of my time doing. One of them is getting work done through others. And the second one is engaging and inspiring employees. Now, if I were to be appointed Chief HR Officer of Vodafone or a company of that size, suddenly 2/3 of my time is not spent on these items anymore. They almost become insignificant. So I will be spending 66% of my time on three core activities. The first one is managing high-risk decisions. The second one, because I'm also an executive member, not just a head of HR. The second one is navigating organizational politics, and this is, I know, is a hot topic, and nobody likes to admit that politics exists in their organization. It's always someone else's issue. And the third item is representing the corporate line, internally and externally. Now you see how a simple promotion has, if I were to sit down and reflect on this with my coach, has me to really think through what are the criteria for success in this new role compared to what is human nature. And the reason, if I were to be appointed CHRO, is probably because I did quite a few things right. And it's so in human nature to just carry on doing what has made you successful, which is another reason why 40% don't make it. They just copy and paste. As Marshall Goldsmith said, what got you here won't get you there. And by the way, this is not public knowledge, so let me give that away as an insider to your listeners. Marshall Goldsmith has kindly written the foreword of the hardcover version of my book. So I will be forever grateful for that. But really, I think there's something really true about that statement that sounds so simple, which is, you really need to go step by step and really sit down and take time to reflect on the new reality. And the same applies to the Prime Minister or the CEO of an existing organization.
It's interesting, isn't it? We say, well done for what you've done today. Let's go on to this new step. But you've got to leave the step you're on to get to that new one. But you often do the same things that got you to there. And it's so profound, isn't it, that as we let go of certain things that was part of our identity, part of who we are, part of what celebrated applause, whether that was a well done, Navid, that was great work, or it was a check at the end of the month, whatever it was, a celebration for your behaviors. And you've now got to create a new set of behaviors, new set of thinking, new set of, as you said, goals, clarity of all of those. And one of the things that I found interesting in when people are adapting, and they're adapting either, a burning platform or a burning ambition, there can be different contexts for each of these things, and the environment factor of what's going on is around curiosity and around our mental flexibility. So being able to hold two opposing thoughts at the same time and not go potty, and you mentioned critical high-risk decision-making. So when we have true mental flexibility, that we can see these things and we're curious enough to look at those options and then courageous enough to make a commitment and decision towards it, takes a lot of energy. And my last question to you as we come to wrap up is one I ask everybody, Navid, and it's related to that thinking of curiosity, of doing new things. And it's, when was the last time you did something for the first time, and what was it?
Wow. Okay. You got me thinking here. When was the last time I did something for the first time? Well, I mean, this is a totally silly example, and I'm sure you had probably something more grandiose in mind when you asked me that question. Earlier today in our new home here in Dubai, my wife wanted to, get the cooker going, and it's powered by gas, and it's the first time in my life that I had to operate a gas cooker, and I was completely lost because there's so many buttons and things to do before the damn thing is actually operatable. So it took me a few Google searches looking at what to do with the gas handle and all that to get that going. But again, I think it all is part of life, and you would be amazed sometimes. Although I have done so many of these coachings over the years, and I'm now in the space for 10 years as a professionally qualified coach. And I've done probably a 3-digit number of C-level clients as a transition case. There are always new things that happen nevertheless, because as you said, Ross, you got the individual with all the brilliance and individual uniqueness. You put them together to work in teams. And so there's new dynamics emerging all the time. And then you add the complexity of the organizational culture and leadership and the stakeholder landscape. And that gives you almost an infinite number of possibilities. So this is part of the reason why I, came full circle to really dedicate myself full time to be doing this, because there is a lot of learning that I can share with my coaching clients, as well as there's so much I can still learn and hopefully capture in the future in the form of maybe the second version of the book or something like that.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, your openness, and sharing your gift to the world. I know that, humanity thanks people like you that are making those brave decisions to help people through challenging, difficult times, so that we can see brighter futures and not just see them, but get closer to achieving them throughout that process. We'll share a range of links, access to things, but what is the way you prefer people to get in touch with you? Is it LinkedIn? Is it email? What is it that really makes it easy for people to engage with you? What is that, Navid?
Yes, absolutely. I think LinkedIn is the place to be. And, it's exactly as my name goes, Navid Nazemian, and luckily there's only one that people are able to find. And of course, there is the book landing page, masteringexecutive-transitions.com, where people can also download a free sample of the book if they didn't want to go all the way and order the book, as well as a free assessment, which is a 14-question, simple, really, it could be titled a quiz, I guess, to test their knowledge on the topic of executive transitions. And then the tool will give them a short report as to what they got right and where they might to kind of, stretch their knowledge to what is current state in the same.
Fantastic. Deep gratitude for your time, and look forward to following your journey of continued and expanding impact. Thank you, Navid.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. All the best.
Do you have the level of adaptability to survive and thrive the rapid changes ahead? Has your resilience got more comeback than a yo-yo? Do you have the ability to unlearn in order to reskill, upskill and break through? Find out today and uncover your adaptability profile and score, your AQ. Visit AQai.io to gain your personalized report across 15 scientifically validated dimensions of adaptability. For a limited time, enter code PODCAST65 for a complimentary AQME assessment. AQai, transforming the way people, teams, and organizations navigate change. Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding AQ. Please make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast directory, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a review and be sure to tune in next time for more insights from our amazing guests.